Hello, welcome to Premier Scene. I'm Claire Bueno. As Terence Rattigan's play The Deep Blue Sea makes it to the big silver screen as it closes the 55th BFI London Film Festival.
Beware of passion, Hester. It always leads to something ugly.
The pacing in the film is absolutely beautiful, and I just wondered, not only with the performances but also with the shot composition, whether you'd like to explain a little bit more about that for us, please.
Okay, I'll briefly go first because it's really Terence's question. I think the cinema differs from the theatre in its capacity to hold silence. I think on stage in a theatre you can't be silent for too long, because within that silence the play will die. And theatre is an art form that thrives on words and language and argument and dialectic. And cinema is about behaviour and feeling and thought. And the expression of thought and feeling without words is, as in life, incredibly moving. And so our process of reduction, in a way, of reducing the scene to a look or a glance or a touch, or the lack of a touch, is in a way the most exciting area of, I think, performance in film. Not that any of those things, they weren't pre-decided. That the beauty of it is it all just happens in the moment. And one of the great things Terence said to me before we started was, the camera captures truth, but it also captures falsity. So if you don't feel it, don't do it. Shot composition, over to you, my friend.
Well, I've always written the screenplays as I see them. So I know every shot when I go on the set. That sounds restrictive, but it isn't. Because if something doesn't work, and you know instinctively if a two-shot is wrong or a single is needed instead, you can just run the scenes through your head and say, yes, if I do this and this, it'll make, or I'll drop that. The scenes at the beginning, which are circular, the circular shots, originally were tracks in on this. You know, I mean, even in rehearsal, it took days and was terminally boring. I mean, but I thought, well, if it's circular like memory is, it will be much more interesting. And if we go from the naked bodies to flesh and cloth, and then we see her lying on the floor, there's something very satisfying about that, in the way music is satisfying. When you hear something resolved, after you've waited perhaps 10 minutes to hear that resolution, you're thrilled by it because your inner ear is waiting for that resolution. And I think it's the same with film, because film is very close to music. You have to look at it viscerally. You cannot look at it intellectually. You either believe in the first 2 minutes or you don't. And if you don't, go home, because it's a waste of time for everybody. But the shots have to be like the acting. They have to be felt. But when people do things that you had not thought of, and this is what's wonderful about working with actors, there's a little bit in it, and I know it's very tiny, but it gives me enormous pleasure every time I see it. When Tom just throws himself on the couch and says, so the rain came down, golf, kaput. It's just fabulous, because it's so felt, and you can't direct that. That happens. And when they do things as you're watching the scenes start to evolve, and you just think, don't have to do anything today, they're really on the ball. That's incredibly exciting. And then when they take a line and do something different with it that you hadn't thought of, like they take a falling cadence and make it a question, that's really interesting. And again, a lovely bit. I just love it. When Tom is standing behind and says, did you go for any special arrangement? She says, yes, steak and a clash. And he just goes. And everybody knows how that feels. But that's because it's felt and it's true. If it's false, you know it like that. But the shots are instinctive. I write them as I see them, and then make the adjustments when we're on the set or on location. But one location fell through, so you think, right, we can't do that now. We've got to do this, and you always end up with the location that you deserve in a way. It's really peculiar, because at first you think, oh, I had the shots worked out, for this particular, and then we just couldn't get it. And you think, oh, well, it's got to be resolved. You can't fart about and think, oh, what shall I do? You've got to think on your feet. And I'm quite good at that. And it was Steve Woolley who said it about me. He said, big things can happen. The camera broke down twice and we lost 2.5 days. And he said, you never get fazed by that. I said, no, I don't. But what will faze me if somebody is rude? If somebody is rude, I think the magic's gone. I just want to put my coat on and go home. It's ridiculous at 66 years of age.
Well, just stay here. Nobody be rude, please. Next one, yeah.
And who else do you call darling? Anger fades and is replaced by regret.
Now, can you tell us how familiar you are with the play, The Deep Blue Sea?
Sorry, with
the play?
No, I don't think I've ever seen it, The Deep Blue Sea. No, I don't think I ever have. So it's got it's one of those you think you know, but then I think it's going to come as a surprise. It's great. I don't know what's going to happen.
Coming with it with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of the film festival?
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of the film festival, and I got an industry pass, so I get to see a lot of the films. This year I've been working a lot abroad, so I haven't seen nearly as much as I like. But I think it's fantastic, and I think the organisers do an incredible job, and you get the chance to see hundreds of films that you'd never get a chance elsewhere. They're not going to get any distribution in this country, and you'll never see them again. And that is in no reflection on how good they are, because that's some fantastic films. Some of my favourite films I've seen in the London Film Festival.
But it opens up your mind, doesn't it,
Yeah.
to the world film, basically, doesn't
absolutely,
it?
Absolutely,
yeah. And have you been able to sort of patronise any of the films this year?
Only I've seen 4 this year. This will be my 5th, which is the lowest in some years. But it often happens that I'm working in October. It's annoying.
I was the one who wanted to wait for the divorce. You didn't.
You're all right. You're surviving under the strain.
The strain of what? Going to movies, having a good time. It's actually exhausting.
Well, tell us about it. We've been reporting it.
Well, you're out here in the comfort, the warmth.
Well, you could get used to it with being British. That's the thing, isn't it?
I know.
We've got a film here that's an adapted play. How do you feel as a director adapting plays into screenplays?
I've never done it. I've done books, but I've never had to do a play. It's the same. If it's a good idea, a good story, if it's got good characters, you can turn it into anything. Even a nice pie, if you want to.
Thank you, Terry. I'm not blaming you! What is it about Rattigan's work that people endear to?
Do you know, I think it's an extraordinary thing, Rattigan. He went out of fashion for a long time, and there's no real reason why that should have happened, because he just deals with the human condition. And he doesn't just deal with the human condition of middle-class people, he deals with it right across the board. But he was kicked into touch, partly of his own fault, but also he was kicked into touch by the playwrights of the mid-1950s, John Osborne and the Angry Young Men. And he was perceived to be a very middle-class writer, and with drawing room comedies and all that kind of stuff. But actually, he's a lot deeper than that. And I've had the great good fortune of working on a piece of his recently, and he's just a tremendous writer. He's a great English writer, and people now talk of him as the English Chekhov, which I think isn't far off the mark.
And are you a big advocate of transferring a play into a screenplay to bring it to wider audiences?
If it works. It's got to work. I'm not a particular fan of just bolting everything down to a single room, because that really is just a play. But if you can find a way to open it up and make it cinematically interesting and tell pictures through images, then tell stories through images, then you've probably got something on your hands. But that's the secret. Cinema is a visual medium, and you need to tell stories with pictures, with images, and that's the thing that we love as we're watching the movie, isn't it?
I got a feeling when I was watching the film today that there's still very much an essence of the play there. Would I be right in saying that?
Yes, because you can't throw out everything that's in the play, but what you can get rid of is exposition. As soon as you show something, you don't need someone to tell you about it. It's much more interesting, and it's much more ambiguous. But the essence of the play is about love. That's what it's about. But in those days, women whether they were middle class or whether they were working class, did not leave their husbands. They simply didn't do it. But here's someone at 40, finds sex and gives up everything for it. And in the end, she finds true love. And real love is to actually say to someone, if you're better off without me, I'll let you go. And that's universe. We all know what that, we've all loved, we've all lost, we've all been in a situation where that love is more important than yourself.
And the film, it was shot, it was set in the 1950s, but it actually really feels like it's in the 1950s. It could have been made in the 1950s.
Well, that's a real compliment. Because I know, I grew up in the 50s and I know what it felt like. Not just what it looked like, but the way it felt. In a house, for instance, all you had was a radio and silence. And what's wonderful about the man who designed, Tim, who designed the sound, you constantly have footsteps walking away in an empty house. It's hard. That's heartbreaking. And I can say that because I didn't know, that wasn't my idea. But I often, as a child, listened to the silence of a house, just waiting for my brothers and sisters to come back from the pub on a Saturday night. And you never forget that silence. You never forget it. And silence is as powerful as music.
Because the film has got this feeling that it could have been made in the 1950s. You're seeing a film that was made in the 1950s. Did you have to adapt your style of acting to encompass that?
Well, it's always, I take my lead from the director, always, and so it wasn't actually a conscious decision, but I obviously had seen Terence's previous films, Distant Voices, Still Lives, and The Long Day Closes, and The House of Mirth and Of Time in the City, and also actually in the theatre over the last year, because it's Terence Rattigan's centenary year, there have been a huge number of productions of his plays. So there was After the Dance at the National Theatre with Benedict Cumberbatch and Nancy Carroll, and then Cause Célèbre at the Old Vic with Anne-Marie Duff. And so really I was sort of stewing in the juices of the material anyway. I suppose I feel a responsibility to, not necessarily to the films of the time, but to the time itself and to the people of that time, and that London and London society was trying to rebuild itself after the war, and that the structure of society was quite fluent and fragmented, and people were trying to readjust and find their place. War heroes, pilots, naval officers were coming back and being expected to retrain as accountants. I mean, even used to the kind of the thrill and the terror of being at war. How do you sit in an office and crunch the numbers all day? I don't know is the answer to that question. So one more, yeah.
Really, again, about the dynamic between yourself and Rachel Weisz. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Well, the two characters, Hester and Freddie, are head over heels in love. And through Freddie, Hester, Rachel's character, experiences, quite frankly, a sexual awakening, and it's something that she's never experienced inside her marriage, and so they have an incredibly passionate affair, and it's passionate in their intimacy, but it's also passionate in their in that they clash with each other, and they fight and they row and they shout at each other and they cry and they kiss and they make up, and it's one of those very passionate affairs. It's the tempers are hot and the blood is flowing.